your book, The Epic of Humanity, the one that you and Matt LaCroix did, is fascinating. I read it last night. I love the way you guys broke down the history of the Anunnaki.
Thank you, man.
It's fascinating. Yeah. So maybe we should like talk about that right now. I know we touched on it briefly on the last podcast, but it's fascinating how there's all of these ancient tablets. Like the Enuma Elish or like the Emerald tablets and all those tablets around the world that are in these museums that all have such similar stories of these two gods who were here, and they created demigods that were supposed to they were supposed to terraform the earth is what they were doing, and then they got fed up, they got overworked, and they went on strike, so they created humans.
Yes, that's it. That's it. Now, it's a little bit deeper than that. Obviously, that's very surface, but that's true.
So when did this, according to these tablets, when did this start?
Yeah. It started around 450,000 years ago, the breakaway civilization.
450,000 years ago.
That's when they arrived on this planet. They came here about 450,000 years ago. At the time that they arrived, Alalu, who made it through the hammered bracelet, which is the asteroid belt. At that time, the asteroid belt was still very chaotic because the asteroid belt is an exploded planet that used to have the name of Tiamat. Before Earth even existed, you had Mercury, Venus, which was in the position we're in now, and then you had Tiamat. Earth wasn't here yet. Tiamat had 2 moons. It probably had more than that, but the 2 we know of is the moon we have now and Mars. Mars can be backtracked. Even modern mainstream astrophysicists agree that Mars was probably a moonlet that orbited a much larger planet based on the weird elliptical orbit that it has.
Really?
Yeah. So what happened was you have our moon and you have Mars, a habitable moon, orbiting Tiamat. Tiamat in the Enuma Elish in the 7 tablets of creation literally gets impacted by another object that was orbiting another star. So our solar system had gravitationally attracted a rogue solar system, so to speak. And it was a collision that happened which made Tiamat explode. When Tiamat exploded, now here's something interesting before I go that far. In the text, it says that Tiamat's glory rivaled the sun. It was a water-bearing planet with land and life. Now, who wrote that? How did they know that this planet had land and life and that it rivaled the sun's glory? That when the sun shined on it, it beamed back because it had so much water and it was so massive. It was 6 times larger than Earth. Somebody had a view of this planet from somewhere in the solar system. But anyway, so it exploded. A huge chunk swung away with all that land and organic material and recoalesced as the Earth. The moon then was put into place to balance the wobble.
Right.
Mars grabbed its own crazy elliptical orbit around the sun. That's why we can only rendezvous with Mars when it's in, I think it's in perigee every 2 years.
Right.
Because of its weird distances that it that it has with orientation to Earth.
Right.
And so Earth has weird anomalies inside of it that go back hundreds of millions of years. And people are like, how did this hammer, this 200 million year old hammer, because they can tell by the depth in these mines, how did this pottery get down here, 300 million year old piece of pottery? It's not from Earth. It's when Earth was part of Tiamat. You're looking at a relic from a whole other civilization when we were part of another planet. Nobody's talking about this. That's the next thing that I'm going to be talking about in my next book. We're talking about Earth.
They found artifacts that...
Oh, yeah. We've got artifacts that date back 300, 400, 500 million years.
Like which artifacts specifically?
There's vases, there's hammers, or things that look like hammers, or tools that have been discovered deep in these mine shafts. And you can tell the years by the depth of the mine.
In your book, you mentioned that some of these Ajiji were working for like 3,600 years to terraform the Earth or something like that. So, so getting back to, we kind of got a little bit off track, but we were talking about the origin of the Anunnaki was 4,500 years ago.
450,000.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. 450,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And they came from somewhere else, right? That's the meaning. Anunnaki means not from Earth, right?
Right.
So they came after there was a bigger planet that was 6 times the size of Earth. It somehow smashed into something and created the Earth.
Right.
So after that, why did they come here, and how did the tablets say exactly why they came here?
If you notice in our book, The Epic of Humanity, there's the most tablets ever referenced in any one book in history, first of all. This book has more references, there's more tablets and excerpts from those tablets. And the reason why, we're painting a picture that all these places from around the world and all these tablets and scriptures and papyruses and cylinder scrolls are all connected to one race of people that came from the Pleiadian star system. And they hail from the Pleiades. And in my new TV series called Anunnaki Ancient Secrets Revealed, which is coming out very soon in Regal Cinemas, and then it'll be on Forbidden TV, you'll find out that there was a galactic war in that sector of the galaxy. And this war was so crazy, they were using something called a Brahmahanda weapon, which can destroy any man on 3 worlds. We're talking about a real Death Star that existed in ancient times. This weapon, once it was released, you couldn't withdraw it. You couldn't bring it back. There was no way to cancel it. And you can operate it from something called a Tablet of Destiny. And whoever had their hands on these Tablets of Destiny had control of the galaxy, and they were stolen a couple of times. So power had been jumping back and forth. Imagine if we're here on this Earth and somebody blows up Saturn. We want to get off Earth because big chunks are coming our way. So there were something called space refugees, my personal opinion. This is not in any text. This is my opinion now. These people fled. This is how we got the Orion, Aldebaran, Zeta Reticulus, the Dog Star. All these other places began to get inhabited. Earth was another targeted location as a breakaway civilization. Some of these beings, according to the Enuma Elish, landed on a planet orbiting a brown dwarf called Nibiru. And some people say, oh, Nibiru was never in any ancient text. Yeah, look at the oldest version of the Enuma Elish. It says Nibiru and it says Anunnaki. The oldest version. Much later, in a newer version, which a few thousand years later, another copy was made by Amun-Ra. He changed Nibiru's name to Marduk because he wanted to be the destroyer. But anyway, that's another story. But the point is, these people decided, look, we're looking for breakaway civilizations. Us on Earth right now, human beings, if we just think that we're going to stay here on this planet forever, we're fooling ourselves. We need to also look for breakaway civilization. We got to create a breakaway civilization for ourselves. Our sun is already at middle age. It's going to die in 5 billion years, which seems like a long time, but that's a blink of an eye on geological timescales. Right. Earth is going to get swallowed up as it turns into a red giant because we don't have a massive sun that can create our sun will expand into a red giant. We don't have enough mass for it to turn into a supernova. So it'll expand to a red giant, then it'll shrink down and collapse into a white dwarf. But it's going to incinerate Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. Gone. Incinerated, right? Right. So we need to start thinking if we want the humanity to progress. Not only that, we've only been here on this planet, as a human being and Homo sapiens for 200,000 years at this level. A blink of an eye, less than a blink of an eye. In any geological time, at any time, any geological disaster can happen here, and that could collapse our entire civilization. Even if just one solar flare can turn us off and we'll be done. So we have to find a way to get off planet, which is why this is big push for Mars. It's about creating a breakaway civilization, learning how to do it right, making mistakes along the way and learning from those, and then branching out even further into space. That's the plan. And so these beings came here because they're like, look, we got to find a breakaway civilization. They were scanning Earth, and they discovered from the scattered light that, like the same way we scan for elements, they discovered there was gold and other resources on the planet coming just from looking at the light of the planet. Same way we do now in astrophysics. So they said, this is a great place. So one guy risked his life to get through the hammered bracelet and made it through. Then he radioed back to Nibiru and said, hey, I found everything we need right here. And then they started sending people down a little bit at a time, and they started building. And when they got here, Enlil, on a crystal tablet he showed to his sister, it says, Ninmah, he showed her the building construction technique that's going to be on this planet, he said, for all time. He already had it laid out, how he was going to build the cities, how he was going to build the plumbing, everything. Everything, the way the city grid was going to be laid out, it was all on this crystal tablet. Now, what kind of tablet is a crystal tablet? Right. Sounds like an iPad or something. Yeah. In my opinion. Who sits around writing sci-fi stories 6,000 years ago? So somebody wrote this because they were told to, and I believe that what they wrote was exactly what possibly happened. I think we're getting as close to the truth as we can possibly get. Now, when they began doing all this building and all this work, we were already here. We meaning our cousins, human beings' cousins, not Homo sapiens sapien, but the prior version of us was already here. Now, this prior version of us, in my opinion, was probably more advanced spiritually. I think that we had bigger bones, bigger skulls, bigger brains. I think our skulls have been found all over. I think they've been misunderstood in some cases, maybe even for aliens in some cases. But but that they had probably bigger pineal glands, probably could communicate silently, not technologically more advanced, but just more in tune with nature. A lot of abilities that we should have, like understanding how to feel the magnetic field and sense the magnetic field and navigate through that magnetic field like animals, we've lost that ability. But we know in a laboratory setting, we still have it because the crystals in our brain orient to the magnet.
Yeah.
So we still have it. We're not in touch with it anymore. But what happened was
That's funny. I have a friend who moved to the Amazon, and he said as soon as he moved to the Amazon and got disconnected from civilization and from technology, he said all these crazy instincts just came back into him.
Yes, I believe that because he needed time to be away from all of that,
right,
and just let your body recoalesce into what it truly is. This is the most powerful, machine that probably exists in this sector of the universe, and so. What they said was, okay, well, these people are here, but we're not going to mess with them. We're just going to continue to build what we're doing. And the Igigi built and worked for about 200,000 years.
And we were already here?
We were already here in small pockets around the planet.
Okay.
And just indigenous peoples, just living our lives as, cave people and things like that. Nothing advanced. And then they probably saw us just as animals, you know. And then the Gigi got pissed off, as you know, in the Entre Hasis and also in the Enuma Elish. 2 different stories, 2 different time periods, same story.
Now, okay, so can you explain exactly what the Igigi were supposed to be? Were they part of the Anunnaki? Did they come here with the Anunnaki?
They came with the Anunnaki. Okay. They were the workers. They were, in other words, if I'm going to go out and buy a huge plot of land and say I'm going to build a city here, I'll probably call somebody like Chris Dunn and say, hey, man, I need an engineer, right? This guy, but an engineer is going to say, well, I need brick masons and stone masons. And they're stone masons, I need electricians. So these were the people that knew how to do the grunt work. They knew how to build the structures based on the instructions or the blueprints.
Right.
Right? So these are the people. They were builders. And they were Anunnaki. Now, Anunnaki doesn't mean they're all one particular race of people. It means they were people who came from heaven to earth. Anybody from space that comes to earth is an Anunnaki. The civilization they built is the Atlantean. But even in the tablets, it talks about some of these people coming from different planets or stars, which means that they probably most likely were a mixed race of people. And I have evidence to prove this, and I'll tell you in a minute. So they got pissed off. They decided, look, we're working too hard. You guys are treating us almost like slaves now. We want to get a break. We want some relief from this work. And even that, not only that, we want women. They were pissed off that they didn't have any women.
Really?
So this is where the sons of God fell from heaven. They came from Mars down to earth in Genesis, and they took women with them back. But in the Sumerian tablet, you get the full story where they go to Adam's calendar in South Africa. They encircle the camp of the god, which is Anu, the head of the Anunnaki at that time, and they get ready to do war. And Enki and Lil and Anu come outside. They get their guards out there. Everything is tense, and they say, "Look, man, we're tired of doing this labor." And, we need a break. That's Adam's calendar there in Africa, where one of the oldest gold mines was discovered. And it dates back to 200,000 years. Isn't that interesting?
Really?
Yes. Pretty crazy stuff. But what's interesting is that these people, these Anunnaki people, they said, okay, well, we're going to go to war then because there's nothing we can do. You guys got to keep working. And then Enki says, wait a minute. I have an idea. There's an existing being on this planet, existing. We can add our essence to it. So this is where they took one of the Igigi, took some blood from an Igigi, and it's not really quite clear how they did it or what they did, but in some way, it seems as if they combined that with the genetics of one of these hominids, our cousins, and they made a clone, mixed Igigi, mixed hominid, somebody they can control. In other words, they can communicate with, they can teach to a certain level. They can get them to do the workload. They can instruct them, and they would listen. And so they were doing this genetic modifying, and they got.
It sounded like they sacrificed one of the gods.
Right. They call it a sacrifice. I don't know if they really would have killed it outright. It could be a term that's used to specify draining the blood out.
Right. Okay.
I would be surprised if they really actually killed, because when you get to that level of technology and advancement, the fact that you would kill somebody to make somebody else live, it seems a little weird. It seems more like a huge blood transfusion or some type of an organ donate. It was something. I don't know if the person really died. because it never really says if they died or not. The word sacrifice could be a word used when you don't know what word could exist in that spot.
Right.
You know, it's potential. Now, that's potential. It could be a sacrifice for real. I'm not sure. But my hypothesis leads me to believe probably a little different because they're just too advanced. So they made this clone version of hominid / Ijiji, got it to work, but so they started making more in these Hathor birthing houses, which the Hathor birthing houses, like at the Temple of Dendera, the Temple of Isis, and all these other places, are there. They're still there. The structures are still there. I take people to see them every year. Now, what's interesting is these people, they couldn't produce babies on their own. If you take a lion and a tiger and you mate them, you're gonna have a ligon, right? But the ligon can't make any babies. No matter how much time you try to mate it, it won't be able to have any babies. It can't. If it's a male, it won't be able to get anybody pregnant, and if it's a female, it won't be able to get pregnant.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
It's genetics. The genetics work to a certain point, and then they fall apart. Just like if you take a horse and a donkey, you get a mule, but mules can't reproduce.
For real?
Yeah.
Did you know this, Steve?
No, I didn't know that at all. I thought if you can make a thing, then it can make other things.
I thought that's how like breeding shit, like that's how they made the golden retriever, by like breeding different dogs together. And
certain combination of chromosomes don't reproduce. So you have the horse and a donkey will make you a mule.
Okay.
But a mule can't make another mule. It's pretty interesting stuff. You know, and so same thing I think with these clones. And so they started getting frustrated because they weren't making enough clones to get the amount of workload done. They wanted them to reproduce on their own. And so that's when Isis says, you know, I have an idea. I'm going to take the baby to term. I'm going to give birth to the Adamu. So she takes an egg out of one of the existing hominids. She does something with the DNA and the genetics inside the egg, what we call today making a zygote. She puts it in her room. That's artificial insemination. And then she takes it to term 10 months. And there's a cylinder scroll with her holding up the baby saying, my hands have made it, the Adamu. That means first man. So now we have the first genetically modified, perfected version of Homo sapiens sapien. They tried to mate him with these other clones. Didn't work again. They said, damn it. So they then took some DNA from him, made another, a female, and then mated them together, and it worked. They said, we got it. So then they started making Adams and Eves in these birthing houses. Adams and Eve. Adam and Eve weren't the only two people on Earth. They were, when they got here, there were already probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people already here, okay? And then what happens is, if you take two people and you think you're going to get 8 billion out of two, it doesn't work. What happens if you start having sex with your sister?
Right.
And then she gives birth, and then those babies have sex with each other. You're going to have genetic mutations, and by the third generation, they won't even be able to, they'll be dead, they'll be stillbirths.
Right.
Not enough genetic diversity. So they created Eden, E-D-I-N, and Enki, he was known as Satan, the Lord of Eden in the text. And he would watch over this Eden. He had guards with weapons to guard why would you have to guard this place with weapons? And he had people in there, and he was having mating times. They have specific times that they can mate and couldn't mate. And it was like breeding people. And they were working on perfecting it. And when Enki came and told Adam and Eve who they were and how powerful they were and that they were the same level as them, that's when they realized that they weren't dumb. That was the apple. The apple was knowledge. And then Enlil comes back and gets pissed off because he discovered what happens. And he said, then he starts calling his brother the devil. You don't listen to him, he's evil. But that was to distract the people, to keep him in charge of the people. In the myth of Adapa, if you read that ancient tablet, the myth of Adapa, which is Adam, you discover that he's been told that the way that we were genetically modified by Enki, he added a little extra into us, that even us, we human beings, Homo sapiens sapien, have the capability of superseding and excelling beyond, far beyond the Anunnaki when we reach our full potential. And it was programmed into us. He said also, the knowledge and wisdom is already programmed into our body, into the DNA, that at a future time we'd be able to tap into it. That's in the myth of Adapa.
Whoa.
Yeah, powerful stuff. And when Adam discovered all of this, he tried to commit suicide. He was kicked out of the garden, as you know. He tried to drown himself in the waters. And the guards came and pulled him out of the water, wouldn't let him kill himself. And then, as you know, they had Cain and Abel, and Cain killed Abel. And then Cain tells God, well, God is Enlil, Yahweh, who's he talking to? He's talking to Enlil, who's known as Yahweh in the Bible. He says, you're going to get out of here and for what you did. And Cain says, well, the people out there are going to kill me. That's what it says in the Bible. But what people? There shouldn't be anybody out there.
Right.
Oh, there's people out there. He goes, don't worry, I'm going to put a mark on you. And that way they'll know your minds and they'll never touch you. And you'll find your wife when you get out there, which is exactly what happened. And he started the Canaanites. So people were here already. Adam and Eve were not the first two people on earth. Two people didn't produce 8 billion people. That's a farce. Even in mainstream, science, when they talk about this one, this one hominid that they discovered in Africa, everybody came out of this one lady. Come on, it's ridiculous. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke. Genetics doesn't work that way. We all know that. Chromosomes don't work that way. We all know that. And what's interesting is you have a civilization being built that started off by genetic mutating an existing hominid species on Earth to create a worker race. A worker race that was enslaved but didn't believe they were enslaved. They did two things. They installed a worship gene in the human genome, and scientists have now found this worship gene. When this gene is turned off, the person has no need or want to worship outside of itself or him or herself. When it's turned back on, the person has a feel or need to worship something on the outside. When it's off, we go inside. So this worship gene was put in. They were masquerading as gods. They needed to put that in there to keep us loyal to them. So we would do the work thinking they would be giving praises to the gods. And then the second thing is, as you look at the Emerald Tablets where it's talked about everybody was spread out around the planet, and people were told to go around the planet and rule over different areas, I believe that the reason what makes you a Caucasian, makes me a black person, what makes an Asian person yellow, what makes an indigenous American person red, is a genetic marker. That's the marker. In genetics, I started digging into this. I said, why is this color difference? In other words, I shouldn't be this skin tone because my ancestors were digging in the, working in the fields of Africa or walking in the sands of the desert. It's ridiculous.
That's the theory, right?
That's the theory.
It's because being out in the sun all day produces more melanin to protect you from
foolishness. Right. What I discovered, real science, in real books, in colleges, you go look it up. It says that there's a 2% variance in genes between races of people. Now, we're all the human race, but there's a 2% difference. Now, that 2% difference is so big on the genetic scale that it would take multi-millions of years to happen naturally through natural evolution. But it happened in 200,000 years. So what the scientists are saying is it happened artificially. They say they don't know how it happened artificially, but this is an artificial mutation. But when you look at the Sumerian tablets and you discover the Tower of Babel incident, it really explains what happened. When Enlil, who's known as Yahweh, comes back and sees humans building a tower into the heavens in one of these cities, duplicating what the Anunnaki had built, he gets pissed off because he realizes, oh man, Enki got me. These people are too smart. And he says, I got to destroy this. So he destroys the tower. In the Bible, he destroys the tower in the Sumerian tablets. And he says, my seed shall not abide in man forever. His years shall be 120. That's the first thing he did. He cut our years down to 120 years. And what's the maximum lifespan of a human being in the most pristine condition, according to Harvard University professors? 120 years. Then the next thing he did was he separated humans and put them in different places around the planet, just like the tablets say. And then he confused the languages so that we couldn't communicate and collaborate anymore, which is why there's all these different crazy languages. And then on top of that, he put a brand. There's a brand. Whoever ruled over an area, brand your people. We know that those are your people. Brand your people. We know those are your people. So there's this separation, this divide and conquer tactic that's a super ancient divide and conquer tactic that happened long, long time ago to separate and divide humanity into these sects, into these different compartments.
So for what reason, though?
To keep us from collaborating, to keep us from living longer, number one, to keep us from collaborating with each other. And look how it's worked. Look how these invisible lines we have on this planet till this very day are still here. Yeah. If I go to Mexico, I'm an alien. If they come to America, they're an alien.
Yeah, we're still blowing each other up, blowing each other up because of fucking religious ideologies.
It's crazy. So I walk across this invisible line, I'm going to be killed. I'm going to be shot. Yeah. Look what's going on in Israel and Palestine. So it's the same. They did it. What they did, it's still working till this very day. That's how powerful it was. And we have fallen victim and prey to genetic modification and dogma that has really held mankind back from achieving its maximum potential in a much shorter period of time. We're still going in that direction, but we could have been so much further along if it wasn't for the dogma and the genetic modification.
Chris Dunn's new book called The Tesla Connection about the Giza power plant, he basically updated his whole theory on the pyramids.
It just got delivered because I had it on pre-order, and then when I was out of the country all this time, it came to my house. I finally opened up all that piles of mail and saw his book there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he reworked his whole original theory on the Giza power plant.
Nice.
And he made, now in a nutshell, his theory is that it was a solid state electron harvester that harvested vibrations deep within igneous rock, deep within the earth, like with earthquakes. You know, like with near fault lines, there's this phenomena where people will see like balls of like plasma light come up into the atmosphere. And he had a NASA scientist talk about this. This guy actually did a TED Talk where he talked all about how these lights that would come up through fault lines, they would come up days or weeks before earthquakes, and they were indicators of how to avoid destruction and death with earthquakes. Like so if you start to see these balls of light coming up at night near fault lines, you know to get the hell out because there's going to be an earthquake. And they did studies and they found out, in fact, they found out there were earthquakes following these balls of light that were coming up into the atmosphere. And it connects with his whole theory that these pyramids, I think it's 14 square acres that the Great Pyramid covers. There was that subterranean chamber under the. I mean, you've been there many times. I've never been there.
I've been in the subterranean chamber.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they opened it for me. It went down. Yeah.
So his theory is that there was a hydraulic hammer or something in there that would go off and create seismic vibrations within the earth, and that would somehow resonate up through the Grand Gallery into the King's Chamber. And then there was also around the pyramids, apparently there's these cavities in the ground where they would pour some sort of chemical and the shafts that go out of the pyramid, those would fill up with liquid hydrogen, and they were sort of like microwave emitters.
I believe that. I talk about that in a lot of my lectures over the last maybe 8 years.
Really?
Yes. I talk about the fact that those shafts were there because the way the Queen's Chamber is set up, you can see that it's set up for, at least my perception of it is that it's set up to extract hydrogen from the water that would run up in there from the aquifer that used to be underneath the pyramid. And the shafts, they're pointed and aligned perfectly with star systems. What do we use right now in astrophysics to try to communicate with ET? We use the frequency of hydrogen to send our messages.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. So I believe that we were sending messages to Aldebaran, to Orion, and all these other Sirius that we're aligned with on those particular alignments with the Great Pyramid. We know these alignments are real because it's even in mainstream science, to send communications. This is a report on Earth. This is where we are right now. This is what's going on. This is how developed we've done, blah, 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 blah. Kind of a report as to what's going on, a communication back home to these different star systems. And so that's what I believe those shafts were for that. Plus also the fact that the pyramid itself was generating power. I think the Great Pyramid is a multifunctional stone computer and power generator. It had multi-functions, not just one or two, but probably 10 or 15 functions.
Yeah, and he apparently there was like a big explosion that happened, like a hydrogen explosion that happened within the King's Chamber that sort of like blew it all apart.
Yeah.
When apparently that was like during the Younger Dryas, when all those cosmic impacts came through, there was too much energy.
There's a picture of me standing right next to the granite box on the inside, and the corner, I'm pointing to it because it's broken off. I'll send you this photo.
Right.
You can look across the room, though, and you can see where it hit the granite wall and made the exact same indention from the corner piece and destroyed the granite wall in the corner. So it flew about 20 feet across the room and smashed and broke solid granite in the same exact corner piece angle. Yeah, I show every time I take people into the King's Chamber, that's the first thing I show them.
Man, if I was Elon Musk and I had all that money, instead of buying Twitter, I would just try to get like reverse engineer that pyramid and figure out what that was.
I know.
Right by the pyramid.
You know who owns the rights to the interior of the Great Pyramid? NASA.
What? They own the what?
The rights. I was told by one of the guides a couple years ago that, get as much as you can coming in here because they say that they may one day shut off access to the King's Chamber. I said, why would they do that? He said, well, they're afraid that, it's going to, the pyramids, earthquake or something could make it unstable. I'm like, this thing has been here for thousands of years. It's not going to become unstable. That's foolishness. What's happening is they've discovered something technological about it, and they want to control it. So
NASA owns the rights to the interior of the Great Pyramid.
Yes.
That's spooky, man.
They also own the rights to a section of the Grand Canyon. So I took a helicopter down into the Grand Canyon. They said we can't walk to this area. That area I heard had some old carvings or something would be over in this area. So I started trying to walk that way. And this guy pops out of nowhere with all black on, black hat, black military outfit with no logos, and an AR-15 and tells me, halt, you can't go any further. I'm like, why? I said, what's going on? Oh, didn't they tell you couldn't come over here? I said, well, they did, but I'm thinking, I just want to see, what's over here.
Right.
And he says, you can't come. I said, well, why? What? I said, can you just tell me, sir, like, why can't I come over here? He says, NASA owns the rights to this section. You can't come over here.
At the Grand Canyon.
At the Grand Canyon.
Do you have any theories of why that is?
This got to be technological. Starts in something with space. And then also, where else? Chaco Canyon. Same situation. They actually own the rights to those round former things that look like they might have been domes or whatever. That now there's no dome, but you can see those round circles.
Where are those at?
Chaco Canyon. That's in South America. And so it's like, so wait a minute, what's going on here? How in the world what are they doing? As soon as India sent that satellite to Mars and took a color image of Mars, the real color with the oceans and the water and everything of Mars, the director of NASA flew straight to India. And the next thing you know, about a month later, they're signing a deal. There's a whole press release about it. And they now put them under their umbrella. And the next thing you know, that image, they put something called false color on it, turned the whole thing red.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Now, the newest image of Mars just got released. I have an image that I took with my Celestron telescope, and a new one just came out. This new image of Mars.
How long ago?
Just the other day.
Really?
They finally let somebody see what Mars really looks like. That's it right there. So, and I'm going to send you the one I took years ago with my Celestron 130 telescope.
Earth.com. Steve, if you could find out, it's called Planet Mars Captured in True Color for the first time ever. It's on Earth.com.
Oh, sweet.
Wow.
Yeah.
What is all the blue supposed to be?
Water.
Really?
Guess what they just said about Mars recently? They said that the soil on Mars is better for growing crops than the soil on Earth.
Yeah, look at this, man.
How do they know that? Let me see if I can find my image of Mars.
So if we're trying to make our species interplanetary to start some sort of breakaway civilization in case the Earth, we kill ourselves or destroy the planet, wouldn't we want to go to the moon first? Isn't that the most logical first step?
It's too close to the Earth. So you see, if you look at what happened to Mars, Mars was orbiting Tiamat, at least according to the Enuma Elish. Let's not say according to mainstream science.
Right.
But there's a hypothesis I have that this information is true because one side of Mars is completely charred and the other side is the most smoothest surface in the solar system. So why is that? Well, you can see that it had a global flood, number one. And why is one side charred? On Mars. One side's charred, the other side's smooth. Because the side that's charred, when that planet exploded, a huge chunk of mass crashed into Mars, charring and burning one side and causing a global flood around the backside. Then slung it into that weird elliptical orbit that it's in right now. And so Mars, the moon is too close. Mars is really kind of too close. Mars' equator shifted 45 degrees. It's like this. Because why? That mass that hit it from whatever hit it and created a pole shift of the crust of the planet and shifted the equator by 45 degrees. And we know that in mainstream science. So you want to work to Mars and then move out from Mars. The good thing about Mars is there's a lot more resources there than on the moon. Like there's water, there's elements, there's gold. You need gold for technology. There's a lot of gold there in veins. There's also atmosphere. There's weather patterns and weather cycles and rain cycles and everything else. So you can go to Mars and there's less gravity on Earth. Like if you and I went to Mars, we'd be supermen. You can pick up a boulder and throw it. You dunk on a 20-foot rim because our gravity, our net gravity from the way our bones are structured is based on Earth's net gravity. Mars is smaller than Earth, So when we get to Mars, now we had grown up here on Earth. Our strength is magnified by a third on Mars. John Carter. John Carter was like real, and that aspect of the movie was real. The difference between the strength here and the strength there, running and jumping and all that, that's real. So it's pretty interesting. Now, if you had kids there, they would grow up underneath Mars gravity. The first generation would be strong, but not as strong as you. The second generation would be equalized to Mars gravity.
Right. We adapt and evolve based on Mars.
Exactly.
On the way.
Now, that's my picture that I took with my Celestron telescope you see there of Mars in the summer. So I took that years ago. Years ago. I think I took that picture about 6 years ago. So I could send it to you.
Yeah.
So what's cool about it is clearly you can see it's not a dry, cold rock.
Yeah. Yeah, it's glowing.
Yeah. And many people have now taken their same photos because they got inspired by me and posted them on the Celestron site and other blogs and astrophysics forum and astronomy forums because they're saying, yeah, this is crazy. This guy was right. I'm like, yeah, I'm right. That's Mars. And I've studied the moon, I mean, countless amount of hours. I've got so many moon images. There's a famous dome structure that I discovered that made it onto TV on 2 different shows because it's undeniable, a dome structure on the moon. Now, that came from the Apollo 11 video, so it wasn't an old Photoshopped image or anything anybody could touch up. It came directly from the archives from a downloaded video stream of the limb coming back to the command module. Now, what's interesting is when you look at the moon, those craters are never in any particular angle. In other words, if I'm free floating through space and I've got things coming at me, it would hit an angle and then make a track until it comes to a point where it stops, and then it would create a crater. All these things are straight down, perfectly straight down. There's nothing that slid and moved into a particular angle to create an implosion. It's all an explosion. It looks like all implosions, like what you're talking about. You have these craters that seem to be all almost the same depth. How is that even possible?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so I went to usgs.gov and I downloaded some imagery there. I sent it to a friend of mine who runs Mars Anomalies. He's an expert on looking at these USGS.gov ground-penetrating images. These came from the Arecibo before it collapsed and broke, a few years ago.
From what?
The Arecibo satellite array that we had in Puerto Rico.
Okay.
It's no longer functioning, but we have images from it still. There was one of the largest satellites on Earth that were able to take radio images of planets and so forth. Well, we used it and pointed it at the moon. And guess what we found out? Underneath the surface of the moon, there appears to be some gigantic, what we can only assume might be metallic or beam-like structures 30 meters beneath the surface. So is it that they only stop there because that's as far as you can go? I mean, we don't know. But what's interesting is they all seem to almost have the same depth, and there doesn't seem to be much of a debris around the rim. Where did all that debris go? There's enough gravity to pull it back down, but it just seems to be gone. So what are those? Now, we have a black box audio, which I'll send to you so you can play this. In the black box audio from Apollo 11, one of the astronauts, I believe it was Neil, said, look at those convex domes down there, or convex craters, I believe he says. Now, convex, I believe he said convex.
Convex means it's like this.
Yes, which doesn't make any sense. Then he says, I bet the people down there never get out. And that's on the redacted, printed statement. They didn't redact that statement, and it's also in the audio. So that's made it into documentaries that I've done because I discovered that. So I'll send you a copy of that. You can play it in this podcast. But what's interesting is that's a pretty blunt statement to make, and knowing that it's being recorded, and then they actually let it stay in the documents and the audio, the black box audio from Apollo 11.
Can you find that on YouTube?
You might be able to.
Okay.
You might be able to. But I know I have the download link in my Anunnaki group.
Okay.
That I can get it. Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
That's very crazy, man.
And I think I have the link directly to the source on NASA.gov as well.
I just had a guy on my podcast about a month ago. He, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. His name's Chris Bledsoe. And he has these crazy experiences where he sees orbs all the time. Like he goes out into his backyard and he has these orbs that follow him, and he films them and he posts them on Instagram.
Wow.
And nobody knows what they are.
Wow. That's interesting.
It's really interesting. And he believes it's spiritual. He believes they're angels. And he's got this great book called UFO of God, where he talks about his like life story and how he started witnessing these orbs, and then he started seeing like this apparition of a lady. Anyways, he started getting attention from NASA, and one day a guy from this is all like documented and confirmed. Like he is like the most credible. The crazy thing about him is his story is so phenomenal, unbelievable. I mean, post these videos every day. He came down here. We went to the beach, and he summoned these fucking orbs from the beach. I watched this shit come out of the ocean.
Wow!
And it's on video. Wow! It's not just like hearsay. We literally filmed it.
That's incredible.
And the craziest thing about it is that there's all these people from NASA, CIA, and the Pentagon that started showing up at his house and talking to him and interviewing him. One guy, his name was Hal Povenmire, who showed up at his house one day and said, "Hey, is Chris Bledsoe home? I just wanted to hope to talk to him for a little bit." And his son answered the door and let the guy in. And he's like, "I just drove from Cape Canaveral, Florida." The guy, and he drove to I think they were in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Wow!
So he drove from Cape Canaveral, North Carolina, and sat there and interviewed him and his family for hours.
Wow.
And kept coming back over like a couple times a year to ask him questions. And he was trying to confirm if the guy's story was full of shit or not. Started interviewing people around him, family members, friends, other people who claimed to be witnesses of his event. And long story short, this guy becomes like close friends to the family. And this guy, Hal, turns out he was the guy who was in charge of mapping the moon for the Apollo missions. And I guess one day they were having dinner, and he asked him, he's like, "How?" He's like, "Is what they say about the moon true? What's the craziest thing that you could tell me about the moon?" And he's like, he asked him about like the dark side of the moon. Like, is there stuff on the dark side of the moon? And he goes, "There are structures that are ancient on the dark side of the moon. And that's all we know about them." He's like, "There's structures there, and they're ancient." He didn't tell him anything more than that. And they're shaped like mushrooms.
Wow. Well, I downloaded a lot of images from the Clementine mission. So I was looking into the moon, and I discovered a prior top secret mission called Clementine. And I said, I wonder if there's any images on this. And they had been declassified, so I got the images from nasa.gov. Now, what's interesting about these Clementine images, when I saw the name Clementine mission, I already knew right away what was going to happen. This thing never came back. Remember that song, "Oh, my darling Clementine, you were lost and gone forever"? I already put two and two together. And sure enough, by the time I got done with the end of this document, this thing had supposedly hit something on the far side of the moon, and it never returned, but it transmitted all this data, gigabytes of data of images, crazy images. So this Clementine was a low lunar orbiting mission that went to the far side of the moon and documented that there are structures on that side. If you remember during one of the Apollo missions, when the astronauts were orbiting the moon and they got to the far side, you were out of radio communication range. But all of a sudden, somebody hacked into their comms from that side, and it sounded like music. It sounded like people chanting in their ears, and they were all freaking out. It's on the black box.
Right.
What? You hear this? You hear this? What is it? What is that? And it filled up the whole capsule until they got back in the communications range again. Then they got reconnected to Houston. So there's something going on that far side of the moon.
It's very freaky.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating thing to dive into, but it's like
the guy with the orbs is incredible. There's
his story's insane.
Because there's somebody in my document, my Black Knight satellite documentary.
Yes.
And he talks about the orbs. And he says that he was able to write some type of a code and frequency that was able to hack into some of them, that they're controlled, he calls them technology, and says they're like advanced probes from another civilization, and that they're watching us utilizing these orbs. That's what he claims.
I was watching your thing on the Black Knight satellite, and that is bizarre, man. Yeah. And there's lots of videos that talk about that, and legitimate people that were like working on the space station who photographed this thing. Yeah. And Steven, you can probably find some real photos of this thing. It's called the Black Knight satellite, KNIGHT. And so, can you explain what this is and what the mainstream theory of what this thing is?
So the Black Knight satellite is this object that is actually orbiting the Earth right now. what's interesting is the mainstream knew it was there for a very, very long time. And those are some really good pictures. The one on the top left is accurate. That's a great photo. The one right next to it to the right, that's another one zoomed out. That's taken from the ISS. That one's a real one too. So you can see that this object is massive. Now, they're trying to say it was a space blanket. So we debunked that inside the documentary. That it
What's
was
a space blanket?
Inside of the ISS, there's this area where you have these trunnion pins, and you have this kind of a heat protection blanket that goes on 2 trunnion pins. It's about from me to you and about maybe this wide. So they're trying to say that thing floating through space is that. So we debunk it because we actually do a comparison in the documentary and show that, no, it's not this space blanket from the ISS, from the space shuttle, I'm sorry, from the shuttle. It's something totally different, not from the ISS, from the space shuttle. It's something totally different. And so this is an object that they estimated one time on NASA at 15 tons. Now, when it first was discovered in more recent times, in the 80s, NASA and Soviet Union went on high alert. Russia went on high alert. They were like, wait a minute. They thought we were both doing something to each other from space. And they realized—
nuke orbiting the Earth.
Right. But they said, wait a minute. We can't launch 15 tons. And they were like, well, we can't launch 15 tons. Well, what is this thing? So they flew by it with an STS mission, a space shuttle mission, and took high-definition photos, which are still on NASA.gov today.
Oh, you can find them online.
They're right on NASA.gov. And NASA labeled them— I'll send you the links to them, direct links. NASA labeled it space junk.
Really?
So nobody wants to touch this thing. They don't want to say what it is, but it's been there for a long time. How do we know this? First of all, Nikola Tesla claims to have received a signal from this object. This is a long time ago now. We're talking about the late 1800s. Then the signal is again—
Did he call it the Black Knight satellite?
He didn't call it the Black Knight. That's a much newer name.
Okay.
It got that name much newer.
How did he know that he was receiving signals from this thing?
First, he thought it was from Mars. Then he thought it might have been from something much closer to Earth. But back then, when he was getting these radio signals from space, because this thing is emitting a signal, a frequency, there was nothing else here. There was nothing, no satellites. We had no technology except for what he was making. So what was this frequency? So he then assumed it might have been coming from something much closer. Then in 1953, 2 ham radio operators picked up this same frequency, and they began to mark it down, take note of what it was, what the frequency was, and the tones. And they didn't know what it was either, but it was coming from outside. Then in 1960, it made Time magazine. What was interesting is in 1960, Russia and America began the space race just before that. And Russia was building Sputnik, already had 1 going up. So all eyes were in space around the low Earth orbit, trying to figure out how do we get something to orbit this planet. And during this process, they discovered this thing was there. That's why it made Time magazine. Another astrophysicist said, wait a minute. Duncan Lunan said, this thing is real, and it has a frequency coming out of it. And he deciphered the frequency and said it was leading to the Epsilon. It was saying Epsilon Boötis constellation, or Boötis constellation Epsilon, which is pretty interesting. I said, that's pretty interesting. So fast forward again, an NSA document gets released and declassified talking about the fact that how to communicate with ET, and it talks about these frequencies coming from space, and it says Boötis constellation, Boötis Epsilon, same location. So I said, what the hell is this Epsilon thing? What is this Boötis? So I started looking up. There's a constellation called the Boötis constellation, and in this constellation, there's the largest void that we know of. A void meaning not even space dust is in this area. It goes on for light years. So I'm looking at that now. I go, how in the world can there be nothing in this space?
There's like dark matter, or
just nothing?
Not even dark matter.
Michio Kaku hypothesized that it might be an advanced cloaked civilization. I said, what? So now I start digging deeper. I go, wait a minute. I look into ancient texts. Now I'm like, this got to be something here. I said, who owns the Boötis? And it says Enlil. In Wikipedia, of all places, which they can't stand to put anything out that gives you any inkling of real knowledge. Everything is pseudoscience. Right. But they had sources that led back to real tablets that said this, so they had to list it. The sources are all there. So it went back to real tablets. So the Boötis constellation and Epsilon is attributed to the ownership of Enlil. When you look at these tablets, so that didn't surprise me, because these people, these Anunnaki people, they own planets. They own moons and everything. He owns the constellation. And so, or maybe he rules over it in some weird way. So I said, this is crazy. So when you start analyzing, okay, let me go back. Ancient texts are saying war. They left. They fled. Would they have possibly dropped a probe in orbit to watch us and monitor us and transmit back to them what's going on here since they left? This thing was in a polar orbit. We couldn't do a polar orbit at the time this was discovered in a polar orbit in 1960.
Right.
We couldn't do a polar orbit.
Yeah, all the satellites orbited the equator.
That's right. And a polar orbit, what does it give you? It gives you the ability to see everything going on the planet, because as you orbit around the planet polar, pole to pole, and the planet rotates on its axis, you can take swaths of data from the planet, topographical data, resource data, human population data, everything, and then you can put it into a computer and you can see exactly what's going on. And they'll had something called an all-seeing eye, where he knew everything going on the planet at one time. And I'm saying that only way you can do it was with a polar orbiting satellite. That's the only way you can actually do that. It all started to make sense to me. So it became a big hypothesis. So I started researching it deeper, and then I got some experts together, and that's why I made the Black Knight Satellite documentary. I believe that this thing is transmitting information back to Boetis via quantum entanglement communication, because Boetis is light years away, so that means it would take a long time at the speed of light. However, if you quantum entangle with a communications device back at Boetis, you can transmit the information instantaneously. And the reason why I believe they won't touch this thing is because what if it has a self-destruct mechanism or some type of a defense mechanism that we don't know of? We don't want to activate it. We don't want to touch it. What if it says, hey, they're messing with me, and all of a sudden here comes the cavalry. So they just leave it alone. Don't touch it. It ain't doing nothing to us. We ain't doing nothing to it. But interestingly, the location of Boetis from that frequency is the location it was in the sky due to the precession of the equinoxes 13,000 to 14,000 years ago or so. So this thing could potentially be 13 to 14,000 years old, which is right around the time of the Younger Dryas incident on Earth.
Now, we don't know, though. I mean, if we could study it with like a drone, couldn't we? Couldn't we send like some sort of other satellite that was remote controlled up there to get kind of close to it and follow it? And
I'm pretty sure you can. I mean, it depends on what they allow, how close they allow you to get. They meaning, they have their own self-defense. They have that Stargate system. They can defend anything they want in space. Probably if you don't go on up your particular approved flight plan, they might just blow you out of the sky. Whatever you send up there.
Right.
They'll give you can get an approved flight path, but I doubt that you can rendezvous with this thing. People would have done it by now.
That is freaky, man.
Yeah. But it's there. It's up there, it's orbiting the planet, and it's changed course a couple times. Now, ice particles and blankets don't change course. So this thing it's got AI in it. It's intelligently controlled in some way, but these people are a million years ahead of us. They're a million years ahead of us technologically. And so we've got so much learning to do. And the best thing to do is just don't even touch it.
Whether it was an advanced civilization that was like an early version of us, or that was more alien-like than it was us, whatever it was, do you think it's possible that they had more senses than we had, or had like an ability to tap into other dimensions, or had more of a perception of what is beyond what we can perceive as reality?
I believe that 100%, and I'll tell you why. I went and did a walkabout in the Australian outback with Aboriginal elders, and their verbal handed down story for thousands of years is that they were seated on this planet. I then go and I visit with the Hopi and the Lakota tribe of the Americas. Their verbal handed down history is that they were seated on this planet by the Star Brothers. I'm like, wait a minute. Two different parts of the world, total opposite sides of the planet, and I'm getting the same exact story. In the outback, there's glyphs that are Pleiadian. Nobody has been able to decipher these hieroglyphs to this very day. Nobody, any university, anywhere can decipher these hieroglyphs. The Aboriginals say they're Pleiadian. So what's interesting is the Aboriginals, and the same thing with the indigenous, Americans, they have these abilities still within their tribes even today. And I can only imagine how strong they were back then, where they can navigate through the magnetic field. They can feel and sense nature. They can communicate psychopathically with each other. They can, in some cases, they talk about even being able to move things with their mind. So imagine the true power that we really had back, thousands and thousands of years ago. No technology, only being able to be one with nature and tapping into all the other DNA that's called junk now that really isn't junk. A new study just came out discovering, they said, wait a minute. Now, I've been talking about this for about 10 years. All my workshops and classes I've been teaching, I keep telling people we don't have any junk DNA. 2 years ago, they come out with this study that says, wait a minute, this DNA is not junk. It really has a lot of functions in it. Now they're tapping in, trying to figure out what all these functions are. But see, we're so technocratic now, in the technocratic age, we've been disconnected from that. But
who did that study?
I forget the name, but we could probably look it up. You could probably Google it and find that study.
Try to find the junk DNA study, Steve.
Junk DNA study, yeah. The junk DNA is not junk anymore. And it's pretty incredible because that means that we have a lot of information stored in our body. And they also find that, see, there you go right there.
Scientists have discovered that junk DNA performs a vital function in ensuring that chromosomes bundle correctly inside the cell's nucleus. This function is necessarily for cell survival and appears to be conserved across many species.
So they're finding more and more, and the deeper they dig, the more they're going to find about this junk DNA.
What does that say, Steve? Researchers have also found in some sequences that wow, easy for you to say. In some sequences in junk DNA act as genetic switches.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Which determine where and when genes get expressed. So it sounds like triggers, basically.
Triggers.
So it triggers that these genes will then get developed or be used.
Right. So if you want to turn on somebody to be, like it says, schizophrenic, there's a gene for schizophrenia. It could be turned off or on.
Right.
The worship gene, which they don't want to put on the Google, they could turn that off and on. It can be, maybe that's why I'm not religious. My switch, mine is off, all these various things in the body, switching on and off different genes. If you got a gene for...
Find the worship gene. Let's just ask Google.
If you have a gene for multiple sclerosis.
Right.
What if you turn that off?
Yes. Some of them are dormant. Yeah.
Right. So if they can master, this is another key to, quote unquote, a version of immortality. Being able to master switching genes off and switching genes on. Now, all of a sudden, we're not coming down with these crazy illnesses and diseases because those genes will never be activated. Because once we learn how to master accessing our junk, quote unquote, junk DNA, we will be able to control the gene expressions. And once we can control them, then sky's the limit. Forget the universe is the limit.
Wow.
According to the God gene hypothesis, spirituality has a genetic component. The M.I.T. gene is one component of this, contributing to sensations associated with mystical experiences.
There you go.
There you go.
Have you heard of Rosicrucianism?
Yes. Yeah.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty crazy stuff.
There's people apparently that are able to, some people do it through Kundalini yoga, some people just do it through meditation, some people do it through whatever. They have rituals that they can practice to where they try to tap in to a whole nother realm. And some people attribute it to creativity. Some people claim that they think of problems before they go to sleep, and then they'll go to sleep, they'll wake up and meditate, and they'll have the answer that'll come through the muse or something like that, and they're able to tap into this other layer of consciousness. And it's all very parallel to this idea or this religion called Rosicrucianism, which I just learned about recently, which is fascinating.
It is. Rosicrucianism has basically taken their concepts and ideas from ancient religions and ancient texts and ancient mystery teachings. In the ancient mystery schools, they literally taught this, understanding that there is a quote-unquote book of life, if you want to call it that. Now, what is this book of life that Thoth talks about in the Emerald Tablets? That's the oldest time it's referenced, 38,000 years ago in the Emerald Tablets. The book of life is this field, this energetic field that stores all information. So right now, both of us are sitting here, we're thinking, right? Our brains never turn off, they're thinking. If we can connect an EEG to our heads, we connect it to a computer, we'd see our thoughts on the screen. Why? Because our thoughts are leaving our skull in the form of light waves that we can't see because we can only see 1% of the light spectrum, but nonetheless, they are light waves. So we are emitting light waves, but what's on the wave of light? Every thought that leaves, it's actually piggybacked with data. The data of your conscious thought is being piggybacked on top of the light wave as it leaves your skull. Just like on the cell phone, a microwave is the light wave. And it's coming to my phone right now. My phone is sending out on the microwave data. It's piggybacking up to the tower. Same exact concept, the way our brains work. So we're sending and receiving information all the time by piggybacking our light waves. Now, when they go out into space-time, they never go. They're here. They're on the energetic grid. They're permanently here. There's no way to get rid of them. Now, what if your mind quantum entangles with information in the field from somebody else's thoughts? If you have the capability to quantum entangle with it because you get on the same frequency and you can actually discern the information coming in, you can get knowledge. What we discovered in science and neuroscience is that the brain doesn't create consciousness. It downloads consciousness.
Right. And that's what a lot of these Rosicrucians talk about, getting these ideas from, are downloads.
Yes.
They talk about getting downloads.
Correct. Downloading is real. When I took that course at MIT in applied neuroscience, Dr. Tara Swart was the professor. That's exactly what we were taught in the class.
Really?
Facts. And I have her on podcast that I did with her talking about this. We did a whole workshop together, a private class together called Spirituality Backed by Neuroscience. I'll send you a link to it.
And this is taught about at MIT.
At MIT.
Spirituality taught by neuroscience?
Spirituality backed by neuroscience.
Backed by neuroscience.
Yeah, exactly. Because the science is the background explaining what's happening on the spiritual side. What they've discovered is that the two go together. They're not to be separated. That we're understanding now that in the quantum field, and the mathematics is literally explaining spirituality. And spirituality is a result of what's happening in the quantum field. When you separate it, you're lost. When you put them together, you get the answers.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I remember there was a study on, they had like some monkeys that were on an island somewhere near Australia, and they figured something out. Like they figured out a way to use a certain tool.
Yeah.
Or they figured maybe it was a new food they discovered.
They were going to wash their food a certain way.
Yeah. Okay. You know about it.
Yeah.
And then simultaneously across the world, another group of monkeys figured out the same thing at the same time.
Yes. This is because that information went into the field, and those monkeys are on that particular frequency because their thought patterns are the same. Just like when there's an invention in one part of the world, somebody else has the same invention in another part of the world almost at the same time, because the information's out there and somebody else grabs it and brings it in. Right. But always sending and receiving information. They found out in the laboratory, Professor George Church, he did an experiment with DNA. He said, okay, let's see if DNA can store information, right? So he was able to take one of his ebooks, and he actually was able to convert the digital zeros and ones into A's, T's, and G's and download it onto DNA in a volume. And he said, man, it worked. I got my book onto the DNA. Let's see if I can replicate it. He replicated his book 80 billion times on 1 gram of DNA. One drop.
80 billion times.
80 billion times. And then what did he do? He said, okay, let's see if we can get it back. So then he converted the A's, T's, and G's back into zeros and ones and uploaded it back to the server. So he knew now that DNA can send and receive information in a volume. And so they said, wait a minute, this is incredible. So now they found out that one human body can store over 13.5 billion years of data just in your DNA. The secrets to unmasking this entire universe is in each one of our bodies right now. We just have to tap into it. All the data is in there. And so because they've done this, Microsoft has made the first DNA hard drive. So that you have a hard drive to use, components. You have the biological component and the hardware component combined together. So things like teleportation is going to be possible now, okay? Because what's stopping us from doing teleportation of animate objects like a human being or animal or this cup? We can only teleport molecules at this point. We teleported molecules from Earth to space and back, by the way.
When did we do that?
That was a couple years ago.
Really?
Oh, yeah. We can teleport out to the ISS and back now. But it's only, small
teleporting
particles.
Molecules.
Yeah. But now,
Steve,
with this kind of database, with storage capability, we'll be able to remember every location of every atom in your body, all the spin rates and everything else, all the frequencies, and we can teleport you somewhere with that kind of storage space on a hard drive the size of this cell phone can do it with that kind of technology. Think about that. So by getting into this type of a bio component, technological component hard drive using DNA as the storage medium, sky's the limit on what we can achieve.
Wasn't it the Dead Sea Scrolls that somebody found that was hidden in a cave in a bunch of vases or something like that? And they had to like, there was, I think, pictures or footage of them like taking these different scrolls and trying to match up where they went, like in the puzzle piece based on the DNA of the cowhide.
Yeah, that's what they were doing. And that's how a lot of the biblical text was discovered. So the biblical text is 90% copied from ancient tablets, papyruses, and cylinder scrolls from all around the world, not just even in that region. And so the Bible was written between 100 AD to 900 AD. Long after the people been talked about were long gone and dead, okay?
Yes, yes.
It's pretty interesting. But what they did was they were copying from the cuneiform into their writing and then on different types of parchment papers and so forth, and then putting them in jars. And so over the course of hundreds of years, these jars would be discovered, and they'd open up these jars, and then they'd be, oh man, we found another piece. And that's how these books of the Bible were discovered. And over time, they were curated into finally a canonized book, and they would decide, well, we'll leave these out, we'll put these in. We'll leave these out, we'll put these in.
Right, let's make it work for us.
The Council of Nicaea, they remixed the text.
They remixed it. It's a remix of a remix of a remix.
Yes, exactly. That's all it is. How do we dominate? Well, we'll put slavery's okay in here, and then we can be slave masters. We can enslave any race of people we want because it says it's okay in here. The Bible says it in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Slavery is okay. Jesus' words in the New Testament says, slaves, obey your slave master as you would obey me. Love your slave master as you would love me. What? Do you think Jesus really said something like that? This guy is supposed to be this love and light, and all of a sudden that's in there? Come on. We're talking about text that has been remixed by flesh and blood human beings to do what? To dominate, control, subjectify people, to enslave people.
Yes.
And so that's why I'm not into religion. I'm into spirituality. I believe there's a God, but I do not believe in any religion whatsoever because I believe religion is dogma, and that religion is all about divide and conquer, and it robs you from being who you truly are, understanding the powers already inside of you. Instead of that, you rely on outside sources, and you keep begging and hoping and wishing and relinquishing your power to outside versus going inside and realizing the true power that's already inside of you.
Yeah, I mean, is it possible that some of these stories in the Bible are like at some level were events or people that actually really happened, and what you read in today's Bible is just a 10,000-year-old game of telephone being played?
It's first of all, Jesus, that name doesn't even exist, okay? The J didn't get discovered or created till the 1600s. That's number one. So if the 1600s was not that long ago, so where this Jesus, what they're saying is Isus. And what does that mean? It means hail Zeus. And who is Zeus? Enlil. So when people say they're calling on the name of Jesus, they're saying hail Zeus. They're not even calling on God or somebody who they think might be the son of God. They're calling on Zeus, which is Enlil from the Sumerian tablets. So just so much, you have to understand how wordplay works and what they do because they understand cymatic frequency and vibration. When you speak, you're creating cymatics. You may think one way, but your cymatics are what control the atmosphere and control the elements. You're speaking, your power to actually speak is what controls and shapes the world around us. And so when you begin to speak these things unknowingly, you've been deceived. And so, even saying amen, you're saying amen because Amun-Ra ordered everyone give thanks to him for everything that exists at the end of every prayer. Well, you're saying thanks to one of the most brutal ruling killers that ever ruled on this planet, who actually started a war just to take over kingship early so that he can rule. And you're giving thanks to Amun-Ra. Saying amen is like saying thank you, Amun-Ra. You're not saying thank you to God. It's better to say I say or something like that.
Right.
So people that they don't know because they don't research and dig deeper into the translations of these texts. And even if you look at the Sinai Bible, there's 14,000 differences between the Sinai Bible, which predates the King James Version. And in the Sinai Bible, there was no crucifixion. To me, proving that the crucifixion was added. We know that hell was added in about the 16 or 1700s. And we know that in the 1835 or so, I believe, Darby added the rapture script. So we're talking about a really super remixed and modified, changed, book that people are basing their eternity on. They're saying, look, I'm going to go into eternity because what's in this book, but they know nothing really about it.
It makes me wonder, like, what kind of stuff they have buried in those Vatican archives.
Oh, man.
And
they
what
got
kind of
so
stuff
much.
is hidden from us.
Whew. Listen, in those 5 miles of underground Vatican archives.
Right. That's a lot.
There's been a few people that have come out talking who have had access to these Vatican archives. They can't say specifically everything they saw, but one guy did come on a documentary on History Channel years ago and talked about the fact that they had bones of beings that weren't human. From their perspective, they weren't human bodies. They had books and texts down there that nobody's ever been able to read or access that talk about technology, flying devices, and all these other incredible things that were hidden during the Inquisitions. Because during the Inquisitions, they were suppressing technology heavy because they wanted to keep their boot on the necks of the people. Mm-hmm. The Inquisitions were so brutal, they killed over 80 million people over the course of 700 years, ordered underneath the popes. That really held us back because we should have been on the moon in the 1800s if it wasn't for the Inquisitions. That alone held us back from technological advancement.